Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, with the first of two presentations that will consider the significance and the consequences of the three containment conflicts that you study: Korea, Cuba and Vietnam. It's a subtle difference at times, but you'll be able to put them both to good use with the right kind of question. Anyway, this presentation focuses on the significance of each crisis. Now, I'm forever saying that history is always about people. I think it's so important to get that point across. So let's look first at the significance of these crises on people. The price of the Korean War for Koreans, from both North and South, was sickeningly high. Approximately 4 to 5 million people died, more than half of whom were civilians. About 10% of Korea's pre-war population, a higher percentage of civilian casualties than either World War II or Vietnam. And many millions more were made homeless, with whole areas of Korea left devastated by the war. America lost 54,000 troops killed and missing, and 103,000 more were wounded. Britain and the Commonwealth countries that participated lost another 7,000 men. The only casualty I can think of as a result of the Cuban Missile Crisis is Major Anderson, the pilot of the U-2 plane that was shot down. But that it had the potential for a nuclear Armageddon puts it up there as very significant. And actually, a friend of mine that I taught with many years ago told me that his mother always claimed she went into premature labour with him as a result of the crisis. That's how worried the world was. So there you go, highly significant for my friend and his mum. America paid a heavy price in Vietnam. The war killed 58,000 troops, and another 300,000 had been wounded. But it's the brutalization of the young men who survived that is perhaps the most tragic legacy for the Americans. The war did as much as the rock culture of the 60s and 70s to introduce a drug culture amongst American youth. Literally hundreds of thousands of Vietnam veterans suffered psychological effects as a result of fighting in Vietnam. This took a tragic toll on these young men and women. Women served in a variety of roles: panic attacks, depression, drug addiction, unable to sustain employment, high divorce rates, and high suicide rates too. And let's be clear, the Vietnamese paid a much higher price. They were the real victim in all of this. Cities had been bombed and fought over. Villages and communities had been destroyed. And it's thought that in total some 2 million Vietnamese had died. And in the wake of the war, there are the delayed deaths resulting from Agent Orange, and those resulting from the thousands, millions of mines left behind. Also, in the wake of the communist victory, some 800,000 Vietnamese fled their country by boat, often makeshift boats, becoming known as the boat people. Meanwhile, a poor country had been made a lot poorer. Now this next bit I'm calling the exceptionals, things that hadn't happened before but affected the rest of the Cold War. The fact that napalm, such an horrific part of the Vietnam War, was first used in the Korean War, and the fact that General MacArthur had wanted to use the nuclear bomb on the People's Republic of China. But the Korean War was also exceptional for two other reasons. The Chinese involvement makes it a very different event in the history of the Cold War. Even if its army fought as volunteers, it was the People's Liberation Army, trained and armed by the PRC. And the same goes for the UN's involvement. The UN had acted speedily and resolutely, and had stood up to the aggression. Yet, much as it was hailed as a UN mission, it was overwhelmingly conducted by America. And an American general, reporting directly to the American president, had forced the UN's hand into extending the mission to one of uniting Korea, which it failed to do. What's more, UN involvement had only been made possible by the Soviet Union's temporary withdrawal from the UN, which still leaves the question of whether this was deliberate or not. Stalin knew of Kim Il-sung's plans, so did he want to embroil America in a war, of which the Soviet Union had nothing to lose? As for the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's widely regarded as the most dangerous crisis of the war. It was certainly a sobering experience for both sides. A nuclear Armageddon had seemed a real possibility, and it could be argued that the only real winner was the world. A nuclear Armageddon had been avoided. The Vietnam War didn't put the world in danger of a Third World War. Both the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China were content to keep America embroiled in a war they were confident it couldn't win. A war that cost America dear in both money and in terms of propaganda, for it was without doubt a propaganda disaster for America. The longer it lasted, all the better as far as the Soviet Union and the PRC were concerned. America lost the moral high ground. Its attacks on Soviet and Chinese human rights records lost the weight they may have once carried, as pictures of napalm attacks, search and destroy missions, as well as the protests by Buddhist monks to the policies of the corrupt South Vietnamese regimes, stayed in the memory. It had also divided Americans. As protests became more violent, it added to racial tensions too. So, an overview of the significance of the three crises, which I'm sure you'll find useful. You know you can find more detail in my ebook on containment, but as always, I'll say that's up to you. The only job I have left is to thank you for listening and wish you luck in your studies. Cheers.